Hello, my name is Anthony Meynell from the University of West London. Mod appeared in London in the early 1960s as a style that combined an amalgam of American jazz, Caribbean ska, Italian design and French film, creating a new cultural hybrid wrapped in a cosmopolitan look and attitude which played out in the nightclubs of Soho. But the genesis of the mod phenomena came with the commodification of youth culture. Manager and mod publicist Pete Meaden's mod restyling of The Who contributed to their early success by capitalising on the band's mod following. Indeed, The Who's songwriter and guitarist Pete Townshend credits Meaden with creating the ethos and art form of youth culture as commodity, transforming this underground scene to a full-blown, media-saturated phenomena of Parker's Target t-shirts, Scooters, Mods and Rockers, Mary Quant, British Invasion. Hence the continual remixing, marketing and selling is an integral part of mod. Townshend also cites Ealing College of Art and lecturer Gustav Metzger for introducing him to the concept of auto-destructive art, inspiring his guitar-smashing antics. So West London to the world refers not only to the emergence of Shepherd's Bush mod band The Who, but references Townshend attending Ealing College of Art in the building that now houses the London College of Music at the University of West London, the intended venue for this year's IASPM conference. While mod evolved into alternative countercultural youth movements in 1967 and disappeared from the mainstream, mod culture is so deeply connected to British society that symbols and heritage taken and repurposed by later neo-mod scenes are nevertheless viewed as a nostalgia or parody of the original historic culture. Academic literature also tends to frame mod as a 1960s British youth movement or fashion, focusing on the subculture's role during the era's socio-political transformations with little post-1960s study or musicological analysis. This presentation hopes to broaden the scope and considers the transcultural impact. Let's start our journey on the other side of the world, Jakarta in Indonesia, and visit the Jakarta Mods Mayday 2019. This is Jakarta last year, a Mods Mayday festival celebrating mod culture of scooters, music and style. So what does this have to do with the 1960s British mod culture, and how did it arrive in Indonesia? Let's have another look at the event.
Hai, nih saya sama Mas Aloy di sini udah berpakaian ala, turun dong Mas dari motor. Berpakaian ala subculture mods yang ini memang berkembang atau lahir pertama kali di Inggris tahun 50-an. Tapi kita berdua lagi nggak ada di Inggris. Betul, nih ya. Kita lagi adanya di Karnaval, Pantai Karnaval Ancol di dalam acara Jakarta Mods Mayday 2018.
It is a transcultural reinvention of mod. A postmodern mod, if you will, taking elements of the subculture and combining them with the current cultural affordances, and this is especially evident in overseas mod scenes that are not burdened by an existing image of previous incarnations of mod movements that make it seem like a continuance or pastiche of what has gone before. Feldman concurs that the spread of culture by technologies does not export a whole culture, but an idiom that is transformed and made comprehensible through the import country's own language. So the era is unimportant. This is not old-fashioned or nostalgia. You can make up your own version of mod since it never existed here. Feldman also stresses the importance of participation and oral histories supporting research, noting that in 2007, when I asked current British mods to recall what their initial associations with the word mod were, I discovered that there were just as many references to the late 1970s, this period of the mod revival, as to the original mid-1960s era of mod culture, while academic texts gloss over this period. I will reference Feldman's book, amongst others, and my own participation on the scene as performer, writer and member of mod band Squire to provide an insider's view. And I will argue that to understand the globalization of mod culture, we have to look not at the genesis of the culture in the 1960s, but the 1979 mod revival that I was first involved with, and which included the Mods Mayday recording and the release of the film Quadrophenia. I will explain how the era provided the first blueprint of reconfiguring past concepts of mod, framing them within the contemporary musical environment and socio-political circumstances, and how commodification, technology and entrepreneurship played an important role at the micro level in establishing a cosmopolitan mod-style utopia. I will then examine how interest, practice and reception interact, visually and audibly from the perspective of location and culture, to gain a musicological understanding of the transcultural processes. Let's first look at 1979 in historical context provided by ID magazine.
1980, a year zero for British youth culture. This was the first time that young people considered the styles and sounds that came before them. It was a divided time in which the ideological lines of Labour and Tory seemed to tear the nation apart. And within these divisions, the youth of Britain seemed determined to divide even further. At the dawn of this new decade, it was the mod revivalists who were making the most noise.
Yeah, I'm still a mod. I'll always be a mod. You can bury me a mod.
This was a culture of young people who looked not towards their own bleak future, but to the early 1960s in order to create a new hybrid of mod and skinhead. This time, standing shoulder to shoulder with the second generation black and Asian kids they'd grown up next door to, in a new, urbanised Britain.
Alan Moore states that by 1980 punk was spent as a musical and cultural force, and The Clash barely scraped the top 20 singles chart with London Calling, the title of this conference. Meanwhile, The Jam, who had emerged with the rise of punk in 1977, and whose quoting of mod style is evident from their first album, In the City, had a large, loyal fan base and were able to slingshot singles straight into the top of the singles chart. Eton Rifles, number 3 in December 79, going underground straight in at number 1 in February 1980. Start, number 1, Town Call Malice, number 1, and their last single in 1982, Beat Surrender, was number 1. It was this new cohort of 14 to 16-year-old Jam fans that provided the groundswell that created the mod revival that crystallised in May 79 with the recording of the Mods Mayday album. Waite contrasts the aspirational optimism of mod with the angry pessimism of punk. And while Alan Moore critiquing Weller suggests a deep contradiction between lyrics that speak of anger and action set against music that connotes the pleasures of dancing and carelessness, it was these rhythms of Motown or ska that separated mod from the anarchic noise of punk and invited the new teenagers to dance. Analysing lead mod band Secret Affair's top 20 single Time for Action, the short delay effect echoes the sound of an alley. The mob chorus of Call and Response evokes a cry for action and be part of the new game.
This is the time. This is the time for action. This is the time to be seen.
The mod revival was defined in the release of the Mods Mayday LP, recorded live in London on Bank Holiday Monday, the 7th of May 1979. Its iconic sleeve and soundtrack was the first major record release and provided a visual and oral style reference. Mod, bands like Secret Affair, The Chords, Purple Hearts and Squire, played out alongside the ska revival, The Specials, Madness and Selector, and the bands often performed together around the UK until separated onto different record labels and live agencies. The mod wave turned into a tsunami with the release of the film Quadrophenia, which catapulted the scene into the mainstream and provided a perfect opportunity for commercial co-optation by record companies and a fashion industry that recognised the mod template and provided a 60s pastiche. While overseas observers, like LA Times in October 79, reported on a new neo-mod post-punk scene emerging in London, commenting on the contemporary pop-art op-art style that was prevalent in the mod clubs, the British music press journalists used media images of the mid-60s and christened the movement a mod revival, referencing their own experiences at adolescence some 15 years earlier. The mod revival appeared short-lived but contained two key references, Mods Mayday and Quadrophenia. The scene revealed its underground strengths and entrepreneur spirit, which manifested outside the mainstream using current technological affordances, in particular mod zines, independent record labels and club culture. Mainstream media was seen as representative of mod cultures outside observers rather than of mods themselves, with music papers like the NME and Melody Maker taking a second tier to hundreds of fanzines which gave mods a voice to talk about their own culture and connect with other mods, and provided a localized when, where and how. For instance, Eddie Piller, who later founded Acid Jazz Records, started a fanzine as a 14-year-old revival mod, which went on to sell 15,000 copies per issue, and he promoted events using handmade flyers in his local 2,000 capacity Ilford Palais, still only 17 years old. And I would promote records in rural record stores, the audience barely 12 to 14 years old, a new mod cohort attracted by the niche subculture that resonated in the playgrounds, housing estates and bedroom walls in the forgotten corners of the UK. Further iterations of mod arrived with new promoters, bands, scooter rallies and published magazines such as Scootering, with its extensive mod music section, eventually outselling and outliving music papers. Britpop ran parallel to the 90s mod scene, a reinterpretation that revisited 60s beat pop bands like Pretty Things, Creation and Action, and movies like Blow Up for style references, connecting scenes in the UK, Germany and Italy into a cosmopolitan network. While Mods Mayday 1999 celebrated the 1979 neo-mod era, Modstock 2004 referenced 1964 as year zero. The 2000s provided silhouettes from Amy Winehouse to media personalities and the omnipresent Paul Weller. This year, Mods Mayday includes Kenney Jones, drummer for the Small Faces and The Who, as the Mods Mayday umbrella broadens to represent a general celebration, while Brighton hosts a 4-day event. The Who revisited mod imagery for their latest album and Wembley Stadium concerts. But how does this British subculture reach overseas? I can describe how global influences play out on the ground with an example of mods in California, from my own experience. In 1980, Howard Parr, an expat Brit, had witnessed the specials in London and was confident of opening a ska club in LA, which created a venue for ska and mod pop bands to play and attracted a regular crowd who took style references from Quadrophenia, MTV, imported records and magazines. I played at the club in 1983 and eventually moved to LA. The premier LA mod band were the Untouchables, whose ska visuals belied a sound more akin to a mix of pop, soul and sky hybrid. Do you feel like a wild child? By 1987, the scene was well established. You can see here a festival at Fender's Ballroom in Long Beach, promoted with handmade flyers in contrast to the more mainstream acts, Rick Wakeman and Todd Rundgren. The event includes the debut of No Doubt with Gwen Stefani, who started as a mod ska band. The audience outside are a mix of mod and skinhead. As a mod in London, seeing a group of skinheads would make you run for your life, but in California, dress was a cartoon mixture of whatever styles you saw in magazines, on MTV, and record sleeves and film. A comparison of button badges collected by British and American mods show how mod or ska had become polarised styles in the UK, whereas California muddled ska, 60s and mod imagery together. Some fans took wearing badges to extremes. In San Francisco, events were supported by fanzines such as Wham, who also ran articles on German mod scenes, while in the UK, In the Crowd fanzine ran an expose on California mods. So the network of cross-communication ran outside of the mainstream. This year includes seminars in LA and events in Las Vegas. While it may be understandable that language or geographical proximity helps establish mod scenes in various countries, how does that figure further afield? Let's go 11,000 miles east to Japan.
One, two, three. It's a mod world.
The Japanese scene is the most stylish, and the level of detail creates a cult of cool that is a fine art. From the Hammond Groove soundtrack underscoring the film of pristine scooters and peacock-suited faces to the vintage Rickenbacker guitars and carefully chosen cravat of the singer, the assemblage of mod symbols and signifiers sends subtle signals to peers. Bands perform original material or researched mix of blues, R&B, lounge, ska and pop, but an aesthetic of style and fashion dictates the borrowed music and not the other way round. So songs are chosen because the original performers were fashion leaders and individual style icons. For instance, The Who and the Kinks repertoire is rejected as the bands did not look stylish, in favour of the Small Faces who did. A similarly detailed mod website describes the emergence of the mod scene and first Mods Mayday in 1981. There were 6 Mods Mayday events in 2019 in Tokyo, Fukushima, Osaka, Nagoya, Fukuoka and Hiroshima. Now let's go to Bangkok, 3,000 miles away, a vast difference geographically and culturally. Here we see the same ritual. A cavalcade of scooters progress to the venue holding the Mods Mayday event. The occasion creates a spectacle that continues inside and outside. Hence the performance is not only of the bands and musicians on stage, but also the participants outside the venue, a parade of style to be admired by other participants. 1,000 miles further south lies Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Posters on the wall announce an annual Mods Mayday. In 2016, the National Star newspaper declared, "Goodbye hipster, hello mod." The paper interview notes that in the last 20 years, the mod movement in Malaysia has grown significantly, a subculture tied to music, fashion and attitude. Then the scooter clubs came along, and the mods got more organised with festivals, riding, tours and gigs. The Malaysia University Art Mod exhibition retraces British origins and highlights Quadrophenia as an important style reference. Flyers describe an organised beat pop oriented scene mixing 1960s imagery, the irreverent use of woohoo band name and punk poster graphics, hashtags indicating cultural connections, and the exhibition underscores the importance of curated retrospectives as sources for rebroadcasting the signs and sounds within a bricolage of objects. Finally, I want to show an example of translation of oral signifiers. We Are the Mods is like the mod battle cry, first appearing in the Quadrophenia film in 1979. First we'll go to Madrid, Spain, where my band is playing a mod event. Roused by the anthem It's a Mod Mod World, the audience then respond by breaking into We Are the Mods, but translated into their own Spanish language. It is a collective affirmation of individual and collective identity and kinship in the oral folk tradition of football chants and encouragement for an encore. Now let's finally return to Indonesia. Innocenti from Indonesia were the first domestic mod band. Their biography describes the context of their forming in 2004 and first single We Are the Mods in 2008. Conceived during a time of stagnance in the music industry of Indonesia, presenting as something new to the ears of Indonesian listeners, beyond music, fashion, scooter, lifestyle and modern ideologies, wrapped in the sound of soul, 60s, R&B and garage, and the spirit of revival era. Fanny, Adit, Agang, Tegu and Imam formed the foundation of Innocenti at its birth as a pioneer mod band in Indonesia. And they have adapted the battle cry into a long-form song, and this symbolises their mod allegiance, but not to the 60s, but specifically to the 1979 era of mod revival and Quadrophenia, which took place on the other side of the world, probably before they were born.
We walking. Kami tidak ada bercia. We are the mods.
Kalau menurut Innocenti, mods itu adalah orang yang bertanggung jawab, orang yang pintar, orang yang berbuat sesuatu untuk masyarakatnya, cinta keluarga, cinta teman.
So to summarise, mod is celebrated by those who never experienced its initial 1960s manifestation. It owes its longevity to continually mixing past and present concepts of mod into reconfigured notions of the style and culture. Mod's transcultural impact is evident in the fashion, music and iconography. Mod is neither specific to people or material objects, nor bounded by territory, language or ethnicity. The lingua franca of mod is lifestyle. And it is unique because it doesn't frame one style of music, but lifestyle and all musics.